I stood in my uncle's attorney's office 3 months after losing everything that mattered, holding a certified check for $80 million with hands that had forgotten how to stop shaking. The number felt obscene against the backdrop of my destroyed life. My sister Corinne hadn't just taken my husband. She had systematically dismantled my career, poisoned my children against me, and convinced our entire family I was mentally unstable. For 6 months, I believed I was crazy too. But what my sister didn't know was that our eccentric Uncle Bernard had been watching everything from his cluttered mansion on the hill, documenting every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move. And his final gift would either save me or destroy what was left of my family forever. Could she win? Before I tell you how an inheritance became a weapon, and how I fought back against the person who shared my blood and stole my life, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments because this story about family betrayal crosses every border and culture. If you've ever trusted the wrong person or wondered if justice actually exists, hit that like button right now. And subscribe, because what happened next proves that sometimes karma needs a little inheritance money and a good lawyer to work properly. Now let me take you back to when my life was perfect. Or at least when I thought it was. My name is Bethany, and at 34 years old, I had the life that made other women smile politely while dying inside with envy. I had been married to Kenneth for 8 years. He was the kind of man who looked good in photographs at charity events, who knew exactly when to touch my knee under the dinner table, who built a commercial real estate development company from nothing, while I played the supportive wife who believed in his dreams. We had 2 children who were my entire world. Rosalie was 7, with my dark hair and Kenneth's sharp intelligence. She read chapter books meant for 5th graders and asked questions about architecture that made my heart swell. Wesley was 5, all boundless energy and sticky hands, and the kind of laugh that made bad days disappear. They were perfect. We were perfect. I had sacrificed my architecture career early in our marriage to support Kenneth's business growth. He needed someone to handle the networking, to host the dinner parties, to be the polished wife who made investors comfortable. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was building our future together. And maybe I believed it because when you're 26 and in love, you believe a lot of things that look stupid at 34. But 2 years ago, I had clawed my way back into my profession. I landed a position at Meridian Design Group, one of the top architectural firms in the city. It wasn't easy. I had a 7-year gap in my resume and skills that had grown rusty. But I worked harder than the 25-year-olds fresh out of graduate school. I stayed late. I took the projects no one else wanted. I specialized in sustainable urban development, focusing on city contracts for affordable housing that actually looked beautiful instead of like concrete prisons. 6 months ago, I made partner. 6 years of brutal work, and I finally took over the portfolio of my mentor Harold when he retired. I had my own office with windows that looked out over the downtown skyline. I had junior architects who reported to me. I had finally become someone separate from Kenneth's wife and Rosalie and Wesley's mother. I had become Bethany again. My sister Corinne worked in human resources at a sister company in the same building. She was 3 years younger, and our relationship had always been complicated in the way sister relationships are when your parents constantly compare you. Corinne was the one who struggled. Corinne was the one who couldn't quite launch. Corinne was the one my mother sighed about over Sunday dinners while looking at me with pride that felt like pressure. I defended her constantly. I hired her as the children's regular babysitter because she needed money and I trusted her with my kids. She had keys to our house. She knew our schedules down to the minute. We had girls' wine nights every Thursday where I poured out my heart about the marriage that was showing cracks I pretended not to see. Kenneth had been emotionally distant lately. He came home late. He was stressed about a development deal that was falling through. He barely touched me anymore. When I confided this to Corinne over our 3rd glass of wine, She listened with such sympathy, such understanding. She asked detailed questions. She took mental notes that I thought were sisterly concern. She borrowed my laptop once to update her resume. I thought nothing of it. She was my sister. She was family. You don't suspect family of being the enemy until it's far too late. At Sunday dinners at my parents' house, Corinne always sat across from Kenneth and me. Always single. Always watching. My mother would ask when she was going to settle down. My father would suggest she needed to be more ambitious like me. And Corinne would smile and say she was working on it, and her eyes would flicker to Kenneth's hand on my knee with something I mistook for loneliness instead of calculation. I shared everything with her because I thought I was helping my sister find her path. I didn't realize I was handing her the map to steal mine. 6 months before I stood in that attorney's office holding a check that would change everything, my phone died during a client meeting. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I needed to call Rosalie's school about picking her up early for a dentist appointment. I grabbed Kenneth's phone from the kitchen counter where he had left it charging. His text thread with someone labeled Just See was still open on the screen. I read 3 messages before my stomach dropped and my hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. She suspects nothing. Tonight, when she's at her late meeting, I can't wait to finally be free. The words blurred. I read them again. Then again. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Kenneth was having an affair. With someone whose name started with C. My mind immediately went to Chloe from his office. Then Catherine, who did their marketing. It didn't occur to me to think of Corinne. Not yet. I confronted him the moment he walked through the door that evening. I shoved the phone at him with the messages pulled up. My voice shook. I demanded to know who C was, and how long this had been going on, and whether he was planning to leave me. His reaction was complete confusion. He looked at the phone, frowned, scrolled through his messages, and looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He examined his phone more carefully. He pulled up his text history. The messages I had seen were gone. Just vanished. He showed me his thread with Chloe, with Catherine, with his brother Carl. Nothing incriminating. Nothing even remotely suspicious. "You're exhausted," he said, with what seemed like genuine concern. "The partnership stress is getting to you. Maybe you imagined it." But I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I saw. Yet, as he kept insisting, kept showing me his phone, kept looking at me with worry that felt patronizing, I started to doubt myself. He called Corinne on speaker right there in our kitchen. "Did I text you today?" he asked her. "About anything?" Corinne's voice came through the speaker with perfect confusion and concern. "No? Why? Is everything okay?" She sounded worried about me. Genuinely worried. "Bethany thought she saw some text messages on my phone," Kenneth explained. "She's been so stressed. I think maybe she needs to see someone. A therapist or something." Corinne agreed immediately. "Oh, Bethany, honey, maybe that's a good idea. You've been working so hard. Sometimes our minds play tricks when we're overwhelmed." I felt crazy. The messages had been real. I had seen them, but now they were gone, and my husband and my sister were both looking at me like I was fragile and breaking, and maybe they were right. Kenneth suggested I make an appointment with a therapist. He framed it as caring. He held me that night and stroked my hair and told me he loved me and it was going to be okay. And I let myself believe him because the alternative was too terrifying. What I learned months later was that Corinne had installed spyware on Kenneth's phone that could create temporary fake text threads that disappeared after being viewed. It was sophisticated. It was deliberate. It was the opening move in a campaign I didn't even know I was fighting. 2 weeks after the phantom text messages, my biggest client pulled out of our contract. The Riverside Development Project was a $15 million sustainable housing complex that was supposed to be the crown jewel of my portfolio. The client cited concerns about structural integrity calculations in my proposal. I knew my calculations were perfect. I had triple-checked them. I had Harold review them before he retired. They were flawless. But when I pulled up my files, the numbers were wrong. Subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that would cause catastrophic failure if the building was actually constructed. Someone had accessed my files remotely and changed them. IT traced the access to my own credentials. But I had been in a client meeting when the files were altered. I checked my calendar. Corinne had borrowed my laptop that day to print something for a job application. She'd had my passwords because I'd given them to her to order the kids' birthday presents from my Amazon account. I couldn't prove anything. How do you accuse your sister of corporate sabotage without sounding paranoid? Especially after the text message incident had everyone already questioning my mental stability? 2 days later, a second client received an anonymous tip that some of my designs were plagiarized from a European firm. It wasn't true, but the accusation was enough. They pulled their contract pending investigation. My reputation started crumbling. The partners at Meridian Design Group called an emergency meeting. They were very sorry, they said. But given the circumstances, perhaps it would be best if I took a voluntary leave of absence while they investigated these concerning allegations. For the good of the firm, I was put on leave. 6 years of brutal work evaporated in 2 weeks because of files I didn't alter and plagiarism I didn't commit. And everyone looked at me like maybe I had done it and just couldn't remember because of the stress. Kenneth was sympathetic at first. But then he started making comments about how maybe I'd taken on too much too fast. Maybe the partnership had been a mistake. Maybe I should focus on being present for the kids. I was losing my career and my mind simultaneously. And then Kenneth stopped coming home. Kenneth moved into what he called a temporary apartment to give me space to heal. He said it with such concern, such care. He said the kids needed stability and routine. And I needed time to work on my mental health without the pressure of maintaining a household. He took Rosalie and Wesley 3 nights a week. Then 4. Then 5. He said routine was good for them. He said they needed consistency while Mommy was going through a hard time. Corinne volunteered to help with the kids. Kenneth accepted gratefully. She was their favorite aunt, after all. She knew their routines. She could pick them up from school on the days he had late meetings. When I tried to fight it, I looked like the unstable one. I looked like the mother who couldn't handle her own children. Every protest made me seem more unhinged. I started catching them together, Kenneth and Corinne having coffee to discuss the children's schedules. Their body language was intimate, familiar, practiced. They looked like a couple. They looked like they'd been a couple for a while. When I confronted Kenneth, he acted like I was being paranoid again. "We're just coordinating childcare," he said. "You're seeing things that aren't there." Again. But I wasn't seeing things. He filed for legal separation 3 days after I confronted them in the coffee shop. His grounds were my deteriorating mental health and my paranoid accusations about his innocent friendship with my sister. His lawyer was our family friend Marcus. Wait, I can't use that name. His lawyer was our family friend Gerald, who had been at our wedding, who had drafted our wills. Gerald looked at me with pity and disappointment like I was throwing away a good marriage because I was mentally ill. My children started changing. Rosalie began saying, "Daddy says you're sick." Wesley wouldn't hug me goodbye anymore when Kenneth picked them up. They came back from their father's house with new toys and stories about Auntie Corinne's special pancakes and how she let them stay up late watching movies. The school counselor called me in for a meeting. She was concerned about some of Rosalie's drawings in art class. They showed a mommy figure with an angry face and dark scribbles around her. The daddy and auntie figures were holding hands and smiling, surrounded by hearts and flowers. I realized Corinne was playing perfect stepmother-in-waiting. She was there for bedtime stories. She was there for homework help. She was becoming their mother while I was being systematically erased. Kenneth arranged therapy sessions for the children with a therapist he chose. Dr. Patricia Morrison specialized in childhood trauma and parental alienation, but she was on Kenneth's side from the first session. Her report suggested the children felt anxious around my instability. She recommended supervised visitation until I could demonstrate consistent mental wellness. Her report was filed with the court in Kenneth's custody motion. My own lawyer, a overworked public defender because I couldn't afford better after losing my job, advised me to appear more stable. "Stop making accusations," she said. "Stop talking about conspiracies. Just be calm and normal." But everything I did was reframed as evidence of my problems. If I was emotional, I was unstable. If I was calm, I was coldly detached. There was no winning move in a game where the rules changed every time I figured them out. The final betrayal came at Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I arrived to find Corinne already there with Kenneth and my children. They looked like a complete family sitting in my childhood dining room. Rosalie was on Corinne's lap. Wesley was showing Kenneth a drawing. My parents were smiling. When I walked in, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. My mother pulled me into the kitchen with a grip on my elbow that was just short of painful. "Why are you trying to destroy your sister's happiness?" she hissed. "Corinne finally found a good man, and you can't stand it." My father joined us, his face set in disappointment I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. "Kenneth told us about your accusations," he said. "About your paranoia. You need professional help, Bethany. Real help." They had been listening to Corinne for months while I was drowning. She'd been feeding them stories about my jealousy of her success, my paranoia about Kenneth's supportive friendship, my instability that was frightening the children. The family had chosen sides, and I was on the wrong one. I left that dinner in tears. No one followed me. I drove home to my empty house that still smelled like Kenneth's cologne and heard my children's laughter echoing in rooms they no longer occupied. I had lost my husband, my children's trust, my career, and my family's support in 4 months. Corinne had won everything. And then Uncle Bernard died. Uncle Bernard was my mother's brother, 68 years old, dead of a sudden heart attack while gardening in his overgrown backyard. He was an eccentric tech entrepreneur who had made his fortune in early internet security back in the 90s. He'd never married, had no children, and was estranged from most of the family except for me. I was the only one who visited him regularly at his cluttered mansion that smelled like old books and expensive whiskey. Every other Sunday, I'd bring him groceries and listen to his rambling stories about watching people's true nature reveal itself under pressure. He had a way of looking at you like he could see through all your carefully constructed facades straight to the core of who you actually were. The funeral was small. Corinne made a grand show of grief, dabbing at dry eyes with a black handkerchief she'd clearly bought for the occasion. She'd only met Uncle Bernard 3 times in her entire life, but at his funeral, she acted devastated. Kenneth attended to support the family. He stood next to Corinne during the service, holding her hand while she performed her sorrow for the handful of mourners. I sat alone in the back row. My parents stood with Corinne and Kenneth and my children. Even at a funeral, the sides were clear. The will reading happened a week later in the downtown office of Uncle Bernard's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen. Wait, can't use Chen. Patricia Foster. The family gathered in her conference room with its leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Patricia Foster ran through the modest bequests first. $50,000 to each of several charities Uncle Bernard had supported quietly for decades. $50,000 each to my parents, which made my mother tear up because she'd barely spoken to her brother in 5 years. Then Patricia looked up from the document with an expression I couldn't quite read. "To my niece Corinne, I leave my collection of first edition books, valued at approximately $15,000. Corinne smiled graciously. She'd clearly expected more, but she accepted with a practiced humility that made me want to scream. Patricia continued, "To my niece Bethany, I leave the remainder of my estate." The room went silent. Patricia kept reading. Said estate includes an investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $80 million, 3 residential properties, and the intellectual property rights to 4 security patents that continue to generate royalty income. The silence shattered into chaos. Corinne's face went white, then red, then arranged itself into calculated outrage. "He was clearly senile," she said. "Obviously manipulated by Bethany during her little visits. This will should be contested." My parents immediately agreed. My mother said Uncle Bernard had been declining mentally for years. My father threatened to call his own lawyer. Patricia Foster shut them down with a voice like ice. Mr. Bernard was fully competent at the time this will was drafted 6 months ago. He underwent a complete psychiatric evaluation specifically to prevent this kind of challenge. He also recorded a video testimony explaining his reasoning. The will is airtight. There was one condition, Patricia continued, looking directly at me. A sealed letter that only Bethany may read. The inheritance is contingent on her compliance with the instructions contained therein. She handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Uncle Bernard's shaky handwriting. The room full of my family stared at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to them. Maybe in their minds, I had. Now, as I reflect on that moment when everything shifted, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone leave you something that changed your entire life? Not just money, but a second chance when you thought you were done? Drop a comment about unexpected help that came right when you needed it most. Because what was in that letter was so much more than money. Patricia Foster led me to a private office where I could read Uncle Bernard's letter alone. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and unfolded 3 pages of his precise, old-fashioned handwriting. "Dear Bethany," it began, "if you are reading this, they have taken everything from you." I started crying before I finished the first paragraph. Uncle Bernard had known. He had been watching. He'd seen what Corinne was doing, what Kenneth was complicit in, what my family had chosen to ignore. He'd hired private investigators 6 months before his death. They had documented everything. The affair, the corporate espionage, the parental alienation tactics. Every manipulation was recorded, time-stamped, photographed. Every lie was documented with evidence that would stand up in court. "I am giving you the resources to fight back," he wrote. "But you must be strategic. This is not about revenge. This is about justice and protecting your children." He laid out 3 conditions. First, I could only use the money for legal justice, not personal revenge. Second, I had to protect my children above all else, even when it meant protecting them from knowing the full extent of their father's betrayal. Third, I had to give Corinne one chance to confess before releasing the evidence. "She is still your sister," he wrote. "Blood matters, but character matters more. Give her the opportunity to choose character. If she refuses, you'll know you tried." Included with the letter was a USB drive containing all the evidence his investigators had compiled. Financial records showing Corinne's embezzlement from her own company. Digital forensics proving she'd hacked my work files. Recordings of her coaching my children to fear me. Timestamps showing Kenneth and Corinne's affair had started 3 years ago, not recently. There was also a final note at the bottom of the last page. "Kenneth isn't the mastermind," Uncle Bernard had written. "Look deeper at Corinne's finances. Follow the money and you'll understand this started long before you realized." I sat in that office for an hour, reading and rereading, letting the truth sink into bones that had been carrying the weight of gaslighting for 6 months. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined anything. I had been systematically destroyed by someone who shared my blood. Uncle Bernard had given me a nuclear weapon. The question was whether I would use it or whether it would destroy us all. The first thing I did with Uncle Bernard's money was hire an elite team of lawyers who didn't work out of strip mall offices and didn't make me feel like I was taking up their valuable time. I retained Vivian Shaw, a family law attorney with a reputation for winning impossible custody cases. She cost $500 an hour and was worth every penny. I also hired a forensic accountant named Douglas Fletcher and a corporate litigation specialist named Ruth Morrison. Together, they began tearing apart Corinne's carefully constructed lies with the methodical precision of surgeons. We started with Uncle Bernard's evidence, reviewing everything his investigators had compiled. What emerged was a picture of planning so calculated, so long-term, it took my breath away. Douglas found digital forensics showing that Corinne had been researching how to steal someone's life for 3 full years. Her laptop history, recovered through methods I didn't ask too many questions about, revealed bookmark folders with titles like alienation tactics, gaslighting techniques, and corporate sabotage 101. She had studied this. She had prepared for this. Every favor she asked me, every confidence I shared with her, every access I gave her was strategic positioning for a campaign I didn't know I was fighting. The timeline showed calculated escalation. 3 years ago, she started asking questions about my marriage. 2 years ago, she offered to babysit regularly. 18 months ago, she borrowed my laptop for the first time. 1 year ago, the affair with Kenneth began, starting as a transactional arrangement, but the financial trail was where everything got truly disturbing. Douglas discovered that Corinne had been embezzling from her own HR company for 2 years. Small amounts at first, then increasingly bold. She'd stolen over $200,000 through fake consulting fees and phantom employee payrolls. She used that stolen money to create a fake consulting business called Meridian Solutions, close enough to my company's name to confuse anyone who didn't look too carefully. She funneled the embezzled money through this fake business, then used it to offer contracts to Kenneth's struggling commercial real estate company. Because Kenneth's business was failing, that was the detail I hadn't known. He'd been on the edge of bankruptcy for a year, losing investors, hemorrhaging money on deals that fell through. He was desperate. Corinne offered him a lifeline. Her fake consulting business offered his company contracts that looked legitimate on paper but were funded by her embezzlement. In exchange, he had to leave me. The affair started as a transaction. She would save his business, and he would give her my life. But somewhere along the way, Kenneth fell for the manufactured personality Corinne created. She became everything she thought he wanted. Supportive without being demanding, sexy without being threatening, present without being suffocating. She studied what I did wrong in his eyes and became my opposite. The evidence showed Kenneth genuinely believed I had become unstable. Corinne had used psychological manipulation tactics on him too, planting false evidence, doctoring screenshots of concerning texts she claimed were from me. He was both villain and victim. He chose to believe comfortable lies rather than difficult truths. But Corinne had been the architect of those lies. The most chilling discovery was a life insurance policy Corinne had taken out on me 6 months ago. $500,000. She'd forged my signature on the application and named herself as beneficiary through a fake power of attorney document. Vivian looked at me across her mahogany desk when Douglas presented this finding. "She wanted you dead," Vivian said quietly. "This wasn't just about taking your life. This was about erasing you completely." The investigation into my destroyed career revealed similar depths of conspiracy. Corinne had befriended my rival at Meridian Design Group, a senior architect named Lawrence Fletcher, who'd been passed over for partner when I was promoted. She'd shared my stolen project files with him, giving him insider information he used to poach my clients. Email records recovered from Meridian's servers showed their conspiracy. Lawrence used my stolen designs to discredit me, claiming I'd plagiarized his work when the opposite was true. When I was put on leave, he submitted his own bid for partner, using my portfolio. He didn't get the position, but the damage to my reputation was done. And Corinne had applied for my job the day after I went on leave. She'd used my portfolio, my designs, my 6 years of work, and claimed credit for all of it. Ruth found evidence of catfish accounts Corinne had created on industry forums and professional networking sites. Fake identities spreading rumors about my instability, my plagiarism, my supposed history of taking credit for junior architects' work. My professional reputation had been demolished deliberately and systematically, and I'd handed her every tool she needed. My passwords, my files, my trust. Sitting in Vivian's conference room, surrounded by bankers, boxes full of evidence, I understood the true scope of what my sister had done. She hadn't just stolen my life in a moment of jealousy or opportunity. She'd been systematically demolishing the foundation for years. And I'd smiled and poured her wine and confided my fears, never once suspecting that the enemy was already inside my walls. Vivian Shaw filed her emergency custody motion on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, Kenneth's attorney was calling my phone demanding to know what the hell we thought we were doing. The evidence packet Vivian submitted to the family court judge was 200 pages of devastating documentation. Timeline of parental alienation tactics. Audio recordings of Corinne coaching my children to fear me. Video surveillance of Kenneth and Corinne discussing custody strategy in his apartment, using my kids as pawns. The recordings came from Uncle Bernard's investigators, who had been more thorough than I'd imagined. They'd planted audio devices in gifts Corinne gave to Rosalie and Wesley. Completely legal because the gift cards had included proper consent clauses in tiny print that Corinne never read. The recordings were horrifying to listen to. Corinne's voice, sweet and patient, telling my 7-year-old daughter that mommy doesn't love you like I do. Telling my 5-year-old son that mommy is sick and might hurt you if you're alone with her. There were recordings of Kenneth and Corinne in his apartment after the kids were asleep, strategizing. We need to document every time she seems unstable, Kenneth's voice said. Build a pattern. She makes it easy. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Morrison, reviewed the evidence and ordered an immediate forensic custody evaluation by an independent psychologist. She also issued a temporary order that Bethany's supervised visitation would restart immediately, and Corinne was banned from any unsupervised contact with the children pending further review. Kenneth was shocked when he received the order. He called me for the first time in 2 months, his voice tight with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. What evidence do you think you have? He demanded. Everything, I said. Uncle Bernard was watching. He documented all of it. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Kenneth said, "We should talk. Just you and me." "Through lawyers," I replied, and hung up. The corporate restoration moved faster than I'd expected. Ruth Morrison presented the evidence of sabotage to Meridian Design Group's senior partners in a meeting I wasn't invited to. Proof of corporate espionage. Identity of the actual saboteur. Lawrence Fletcher's conspiracy with Corinne to destroy my career so he could take my place. Lawrence was fired within 48 hours. The partners offered me full reinstatement, plus a damages settlement of $300,000 for the harm to my professional reputation. I declined the partnership position. Too much had happened in those walls for me to ever feel safe there again. Instead, I used part of Uncle Bernard's inheritance and the settlement money to start my own architectural firm, Meridian Legacy Design, named in honor of Harold, my mentor who'd believed in me. Several clients who'd been manipulated into leaving me now understood they'd been lied to. They reached out directly, apologizing, asking if I'd consider working with them again. My first 3 contracts were worth a combined $4 million. News spread through the industry about the conspiracy against me. My professional reputation began not just recovery but enhancement. I became the architect who'd survived corporate sabotage and came back stronger. Conference organizers invited me to speak on workplace ethics and whistleblower protections. Corinne lost her HR job when the embezzlement was reported to her company. They'd suspected financial irregularities but couldn't trace them until Douglas handed them a complete forensic accounting, with evidence that would stand up in criminal court. She was arrested at work, handcuffed in front of her colleagues, charged with embezzlement, fraud, wire fraud, and attempted insurance fraud. The bail was set at $250,000. She couldn't make it from her own funds because everything she'd stolen had already been spent on her campaign against me. She called our parents, begging for help. They paid her bail, but for the first time, I heard doubt in my mother's voice when she called me. "Is any of this true?" she asked. "Did Corinne really do these things?" "Uncle Bernard left you evidence too," I said. "Check your inheritance. He wrote you a letter." I'd honored Uncle Bernard's third condition. Before releasing the evidence publicly, I gave Corinne one chance to confess. I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a conference room in Vivian's law office. I invited my parents. I laid out the evidence methodically. Financial records showing embezzlement and the fake consulting business. Recordings proving the affair and the parental alienation. Timeline demonstrating 3 years of calculated planning. Forged insurance documents that proved she'd wanted me dead. Corinne's mask finally cracked as I presented each piece of evidence. She cycled through predictable stages. Denial first, claiming the evidence was fabricated. Then tears, performing the victim. Then anger, cold and vicious, and finally honest. "You had everything!" She screamed at me across the conference table. "You were always the perfect one, the smart one, the successful one. Everyone loved you and I was just the disappointing sister. So yes, I took it. You didn't deserve it anyway." My mother was crying. My father sat in stunned silence, his face gray. I kept my voice calm, factual, empty of the emotion that was tearing me apart inside. "You didn't want my life," I said. "You wanted to destroy me. There's a difference." I offered her the deal Vivian had prepared. Full confession, cooperation with the custody case, agreement to a repayment plan for the money she'd stolen. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue the maximum criminal charges. She'd still face consequences, but not decades in prison. Corinne looked at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won," she said. "You think your rich dead uncle saved you. But Kenneth loves me. The kids love me. You can't take that back with lawyers and money." She refused the deal, gathered her purse, and walked out, still believing she could manipulate her way out of the consequences. Still convinced she was the victim in a story where she'd been the villain all along. My parents stayed after Corinne left. They apologized, finally, but the words felt hollow. "We should have seen it," my mother said. "We should have believed you." "You chose not to," I replied. "That's different from not seeing." The damage to our relationship was profound. They'd sided against their own daughter, believed the lies, enabled the abuse. Trust broken that thoroughly doesn't heal quickly. Maybe it doesn't heal at all. Maybe you just build something different on top of the rubble. But they were seeing the truth now, finally, when the evidence was too overwhelming to deny. And that would have to be enough. The custody trial lasted 3 days and became a public spectacle. Local news covered it because the details were too salacious to ignore. Wealthy tech entrepreneurs' inheritance exposes family conspiracy. It was the kind of story that confirmed everyone's worst suspicions about families and money and betrayal. Vivian presented our case with surgical precision. She walked the judge through the timeline, showing how Corinne had systematically alienated my children from me over 18 months. Audio recordings played in open court. Rosalie's 7-year-old voice saying, "Mommy might hurt us." Wesley's 5-year-old voice asking why Mommy didn't love them anymore. I cried hearing those recordings in court. Not performative crying for the judge, but genuine grief for what had been done to my babies, who'd been weaponized by an adult they trusted. The child psychologist who'd treated Rosalie and Wesley testified about parental alienation syndrome. He explained how children can be manipulated into rejecting a loving parent through consistent, calculated messaging. How the effects can last years, even with intervention. Then Vivian called the therapist Kenneth had chosen, Dr. Patricia Morrison. Under oath, Dr. Morrison admitted that Corinne had influenced her reports. They'd had coffee before sessions. Corinne framing the narrative, suggesting what to look for in my behavior. Dr. Morrison lost her license for ethical violations. She cried on the stand, said she'd believed she was helping protect children from an unstable mother. She'd believed Corinne's lies too. Kenneth took the stand on day 2. Vivian's cross-examination was brutal. "When did you first suspect your wife was mentally unstable?" Vivian asked. Kenneth looked uncomfortable in his suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "About 8 months ago," he said. "She started making paranoid accusations." "Did you verify these accusations were false?" Kenneth hesitated. "Corinne told me they were false." "Did you investigate yourself?" "I trusted Corinne." Vivian walked him through every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence that showed he'd chosen to believe comfortable lies rather than difficult truths. She presented the financial records showing his failing business, the contracts from Corinne's fake company, the timeline proving their affair had started as a transaction. Kenneth's face went pale as the full picture emerged. He'd known some of it, clearly, but not all of it. Not the extent of Corinne's planning. Not the embezzlement or the forged insurance policy or the 3-year timeline. Under cross-examination, he admitted he'd been willfully blind. He'd wanted to believe Corinne because the alternative meant admitting he'd destroyed his family for a lie. His testimony revealed genuine remorse. But remorse doesn't undo betrayal. Remorse doesn't give me back the year I lost with my children or the career I had to rebuild from ashes. Corinne took the stand against her attorney's advice. She couldn't resist the chance to perform for an audience. But Vivian's cross-examination stripped away every defense. Corinne contradicted herself repeatedly. She claimed she loved Kenneth, then admitted under pressure that the relationship had started as a business arrangement. She claimed she loved my children, then couldn't explain why she'd told them their mother might hurt them if that wasn't true. Her mask cracked completely under Vivian's methodical questioning. The judge called a recess when Corinne started screaming at me across the courtroom, calling me selfish and spoiled and claiming I'd stolen everything from her first. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation for Corinne before the trial could continue. Kenneth requested a private meeting with me during the recess between day 2 and day 3. Against Vivian's advice, I agreed. We met in a conference room at the courthouse. Lawyers present as witnesses. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 8 months. His eyes were hollow, his expensive suit hanging wrong on a frame that had lost weight. "I didn't know the extent of it," he said. "I believed her. I wanted to believe her because the alternative was admitting I'd destroyed everything for nothing." "You had a choice every step of the way," I said. "You chose to believe lies because they were convenient. You chose to use my children as weapons because it served you." He nodded, accepting that. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I know I don't deserve it. But I want to testify against Corinne in the criminal trial. I want to help fix what I broke, even if I can't fix us." He showed me texts from recent months, after Uncle Bernard's will had been read. Corinne had become controlling, jealous, violent when he'd suggested maybe they'd been wrong about me. She'd threatened him if he considered reconciling with me. She'd shown him who she really was once she thought she'd won completely. "I realized I'd been manipulated," Kenneth said, "but I participated in the manipulation. I chose to see you as the villain because it was easier than seeing myself that way. For the first time in a year, He was being honest. Not performing. Not manipulating. Just brutally honest about his own failures. "I don't forgive you," I said. "I probably never will, but our children need their father, so we'll build something functional for them. Not for us, for Rosalie and Wesley." He agreed. It was the first conversation we'd had in months that felt real instead of strategic. The final day of trial, Corinne arrived looking disheveled and frantic. The psychiatric evaluation had found narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. Not legally insane, but pathologically self-centered, incapable of genuine empathy, unable to see other people as real rather than as props in her narrative. The judge delivered her ruling after reviewing all evidence and testimony. Full custody to Bethany, with supervised visitation for Kenneth initially, increasing to standard joint custody pending successful completion of family therapy. Restraining order against Corinne requiring no contact with the minor children. Recommendation that criminal charges proceed to full prosecution. Corinne screamed in the courtroom when the ruling was read. She had to be physically removed by bailiffs, still screaming accusations. "You stole everything from me first. You were born and took all their love. I was never enough because you existed." Finally, the truth. This had never been about my husband or my job or my children. This had been about a lifetime of jealousy stemming from our parents' favoritism, festering into pathological hatred. But instead of seeking therapy or distance or any healthy way to process that pain, Corinne had sought my destruction, and she'd nearly succeeded. She was taken into custody immediately on the criminal charges. Bail was revoked due to flight risk. She'd spend the next months in county jail awaiting trial for embezzlement, fraud, wire fraud, and attempted insurance fraud. The judge's gavel fell, and my children were legally mine again. But I knew the real work was just beginning. The first unsupervised weekend with Rosalie and Wesley happened 6 months after the trial. 6 months of supervised visits in sterile rooms with a social worker, watching, documenting, evaluating. 6 months of slow, painful rebuilding of trust that had been systematically destroyed. They were tentative that first weekend. Rosalie kept looking around like she expected someone to appear and take her away. Wesley stayed close to his sister, using her as a buffer between himself and me. I didn't push. I made their favorite meals, kept their rooms exactly as they'd left them, and let them lead. We played board games. We watched movies. We existed in the same space without forcing connection that would come in its own time or not at all. Family therapy sessions happened twice weekly with Dr. Marcus Chen. Wait, can't use that name. Dr. Marcus Sheffield, a trauma specialist who worked specifically with children affected by parental alienation. In those sessions, Rosalie and Wesley slowly revealed what Corinne had told them over 18 months of careful manipulation. "Mommy is sick and might hurt you if you're alone with her. Daddy and I love you more than Mommy does. Mommy doesn't want to see you, she's too busy with work." Processing their fear and confusion took months. Dr. Sheffield said it might take years. The effects of parental alienation don't disappear just because the alienating parent is removed. The damage goes deep, but there were small victories. Wesley asked for my special pancakes one Saturday morning, the ones with chocolate chips arranged in a smiley face. Rosalie brought me a school project about family and included a drawing of me without the angry face and dark scribbles. Kenneth participated in joint sessions, taking accountability in age-appropriate ways. He apologized to the children for lying to them about me, for letting them believe I didn't love them when the opposite was true. Our co-parenting relationship was professional, cordial, nothing more. He'd moved to a different apartment, was dating someone new named Patricia who seemed genuinely kind. The children liked her cautiously. I appreciated that she didn't try to replace me. By month 6, Rosalie said, "I missed you," Mommy unprompted. And I cried in the bathroom after she went to sleep because those 4 words meant everything. I never badmouthed Kenneth or Corinne to the children. Dr. Sheffield advised against it, said they needed to process their own feelings without adult interference. The evidence would speak for itself as they got older and could understand more. My professional life had undergone its own reconstruction. Meridian Legacy Design was thriving beyond what I'd imagined. I'd hired 3 other architects who'd been victims of industry sabotage, creating a culture of radical transparency and mutual support. We landed a major city contract for a sustainable housing development that would provide affordable homes without sacrificing design quality. The project was worth $15 million and would take 3 years to complete. I used a portion of Uncle Bernard's inheritance to fund a low-income housing initiative. Every project my firm completed, we simultaneously designed and built one affordable unit. I named the initiative the Bernard Foster Memorial Housing Project. My professional reputation wasn't just restored, it was enhanced. I became known as the architect who survived corporate warfare and chose to build something better from the ruins. Conference organizers invited me to speak at industry events. Young architects sought me out as a mentor. My relationship with my parents slowly, painfully mended, but with boundaries that would never fully come down. We attended family therapy together, confronting their role in the favoritism that had fueled Corinne's pathology. My mother admitted she'd seen troubling behaviors in Corinne growing up. The lying, the manipulation, the inability to accept responsibility. But she'd made excuses, covered for her, enabled the patterns that eventually exploded into deliberate destruction. My father acknowledged he'd taken the easy path, believing the charming daughter over the one who made him uncomfortable with difficult truths. They would never have the relationship with me they'd had before. Trust broken that completely doesn't fully heal. But we built something more honest on top of the wreckage, even if it was more distant. Uncle Bernard's gift had included letters to them, too, read after the estate was fully settled. He detailed his observations of family dynamics going back decades, calling them out for creating competition between their daughters, for loving conditionally based on achievement rather than character. His final wisdom forced a family reckoning none of us could escape. Corinne was in prison serving an 18-month sentence after accepting a plea deal. She'd faced up to 10 years if convicted on all charges, but cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced time. My parents visited her. I did not. That boundary held firm. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I could release my anger without opening my life to someone who'd tried to destroy it. A year after standing in that attorney's office holding a check that changed everything, I stood in my new firm's conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the downtown skyline. Rosalie and Wesley's drawings covered my office walls, new ones without angry faces or dark scribbles. My life looked nothing like it had 2 years ago, but it was authentically mine in a way the old life never was. 2 years after Uncle Bernard died and changed my life with an inheritance that was so much more than money, I stood in a very different place than I could have imagined during those dark months when I'd lost everything. My children were 9 and 7 now, thriving in therapy and school and in the security of knowing they were loved consistently. They saw Kenneth regularly, a relationship healed but forever changed. He'd remarried, and Patricia was genuinely kind to Rosalie and Wesley in a way that made co-parenting functional. Meridian Legacy Design had 15 employees now, a reputation for integrity that brought clients specifically because they knew we valued ethics over profit. The Sustainable Housing Project was in its 2nd year of construction, transforming a blighted neighborhood into a community people were proud to call home. I'd started dating again, slowly, cautiously. A man named Russell from architecture school who'd known me before Kenneth. Before the destruction. Before I'd become someone who viewed trust as currency spent carefully. We were taking things slow. I was learning to let someone in without waiting for betrayal. My relationship with my parents was cordial. Monthly dinners with guarded conversation. We'd never have the closeness we'd had before, but we had something more honest built on accountability and boundaries. They'd done the work in therapy, confronted their failures as parents, accepted that love wasn't enough if it came without wisdom. Uncle Bernard's inheritance was mostly invested in trust funds for Rosalie and Wesley's education and future. A portion funded the housing initiative that would be his legacy and mine. The rest gave me security and options I'd never take for granted again. I'd never be financially vulnerable again. I'd never be professionally vulnerable again. I'd never trust blindly again. Those losses couldn't be recovered, but the wisdom gained from them was its own kind of inheritance. Corinne was released from prison after 14 months, having served her sentence with time off for good behavior. She moved to a different state, cut ties with most of the family. I heard she was working retail, living in a small apartment, rebuilding a life from the rubble of choices that had destroyed her. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate required energy I wouldn't spend on someone who'd already stolen too much of my life. I felt something closer to pity, understanding that she'd been as much a victim of untreated pathology as she'd been a villain who chose destruction. But pity didn't mean reconciliation. That door stayed closed. On the second anniversary of Uncle Bernard's death, I visited his grave at the cemetery on the hill overlooking the city. I brought flowers, white roses that had been his favorite. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and told him about Rosalie's straight-A report card and Wesley's newfound love of soccer, about the housing project that would be named after him, about the firm that was building a reputation on the values he'd tried to teach me in his cluttered mansion over whiskey and rambling stories. "Thank you," I said to the granite marker, "for seeing the truth, for giving me weapons to fight, for believing I was worth saving when everyone else had decided I wasn't." A letter had arrived 6 months after his death, delayed by some quirk of his estate attorney's procedures. A final message he'd arranged to be sent only after everything was settled. "I knew you would win," he'd written, "because you fight for others, not just yourself. That's the difference between you and Corinne. She destroyed because destruction was easier than building. You built because you understood that's the only way to truly win." Standing at his grave, I reflected on what winning actually meant. I didn't get my old life back. Kenneth and I would never reconcile. The year I'd lost with my children couldn't be recovered. My family relationships had permanent scars. But I got something better. I got a life I'd built deliberately, with eyes wide open to people's capacity for both good and terrible harm. I got children who knew their worth and wouldn't accept manipulation. I got a career built on my own terms, with values I wouldn't compromise. Rosalie and Wesley were playing nearby, chasing each other around headstones in a way that should probably be disrespectful but just felt like life asserting itself in a place of death. That was the victory. Not revenge, though justice had been served. Not destruction, though Corinne had faced consequences. The victory was their childhood restored, their ability to play without fear, their trust earned back through consistency and time. I looked at Rosalie laughing, Wesley tripping and getting back up, both of them just being normal kids with normal problems instead of weapons in an adult war. Corinne stole my husband, my job, and almost stole my children. But Uncle Bernard's gift wasn't actually the money, though the money made everything possible. The gift was truth. Documentation that I wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't the villain in a story where I'd been systematically destroyed. And the truth gave me power to take my life back one strategic move at a time. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming so successful, so whole, so genuinely content that your enemy becomes irrelevant. And right now, watching my children play without fear, running a business I'm proud of, building a life that's authentically mine, I've never been more irrelevant to Corinne's memory. I won by living well. and that's a victory she can never take away. Before I leave you today, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind as I've shared this story. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty? Have you ever had to rebuild your life from ruins someone close to you created? And here's the hard question. Do you believe family members who betray you deserve forgiveness? Or is protecting yourself more important than blood ties? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to know how others have navigated these impossible situations. And if this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar or you know someone who has, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I'll be sharing more stories about surviving family warfare and coming out stronger on the other side. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not crazy, that gaslighting is real, and that you can lose everything and still rebuild with integrity. Your share might reach someone who's in the middle of their own battle and needs to know they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, blood doesn't make family, character does. Choose your battles carefully, document everything, and never underestimate the power of a good lawyer and an inheritance from someone who actually saw the truth. May your families be honest, your boundaries be firm, and your trust be given only to those who've proven they deserve it. Take care of yourselves out there.